World events in 1816. America. James Monroe elected as president. In November 1816, James Monroe, a Democratic Republican, won the U.S. presidential election, succeeding James Madison. This began the era of good feelings. Second Bank of the United States chartered. On April 10, 1816, Congress chartered the Second Bank of the U.S. for 20 years to help stabilize the economy after the War of 1812. Tariff of 1816. The first protective tariff in U.S. history was enacted to protect American manufacturers from cheap British imports. The year without a summer. Due to the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815, 1816 was marked by extreme weather, crop failures, and food shortages across the Northern Hemisphere. In New England and other U.S. regions, frosts occurred in June, July, and August, devastating agriculture. African Methodist Episcopal, AME, church founded. In 1816, Richard Allen officially established the AME Church in Philadelphia, the first independent black denomination in the United States. Indiana admitted as a state. Indiana became the 19th state of the United States on December 11, 1816. Colonization movement begins. The American Colonization Society was founded in December 1816 with the aim of resettling free African Americans in Africa, later leading to the establishment of Liberia. Britain. Post-Napoleonic adjustments. After Napoleon's defeat in 1815, Britain shifted to peacetime footing. Soldiers were demobilized, causing unemployment and unrest. Income tax abolished, March 1816. The unpopular wartime income tax, introduced by William Pitt in 1799, was repealed after public pressure. Lord Liverpool as Prime Minister. Robert Jenkinson, 2nd Earl of Liverpool, continued as Prime Minister, dealing with economic distress and social unrest. The year without a summer. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 led to climate disruption. Britain suffered poor harvests, food shortages, and famine-like conditions. Bread prices rose, fueling unrest. Spafields riots, December 1816. A radical political demonstration in London calling for parliamentary reform turned violent. Authorities cracked down, fueling fears of revolution similar to France's. Literary significance. In June 1816, Mary Shelley began writing Frankenstein, and John William Polidori started The Vampyre. Both works were deeply influenced by the dark atmosphere of that year. France. Dissolution of the Chambre introuvable, September 1816. The ultra-royalist-dominated Chamber of Deputies, elected in 1815, was dissolved by Louis XVIII because it was too reactionary, calling for vengeance against former revolutionaries and Bonapartists. This marked a shift toward a more moderate royalist government. The year without a summer. Like the rest of Europe, France experienced crop failures, food shortages, and rising prices due to the climatic effects of the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora. This worsened rural hardship and urban discontent. Romanticism emerging. Writers and artists in France were beginning to develop the Romantic style, influenced by both political turmoil and natural calamities. Spain. Suppression of Liberalism. Ferdinand's government persecuted liberals, intellectuals, and reformers who had supported constitutional government during the Peninsular War. Argentina declared independence on July 9, 1816, at the Congress of Tucumán. Revolutionary movements were spreading in Venezuela, New Granada, Colombia, Chile, and other territories. Portugal. Death of Queen Maria I, March 20, 1816. Maria, who had been Queen of Portugal since 1777 and had been declared mentally unfit in later years, died in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Accession of King João VI. Her son, João VI, who had been acting as Prince Regent since 1799, formally became King of the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and the Algarves in 1816. His reign marked the continuation of the royal court in Brazil, where it had relocated during the Napoleonic invasions of Portugal. Struggles in South America. Portugal was engaged in disputes in the Rio de la Plata region, modern Uruguay, Argentina. Portuguese forces from Brazil were preparing to intervene militarily, eventually leading to the invasion of the Banda Oriental, 1816, and its later annexation as the Cisplatina province. Sweden. Reign of Charles XIII. King Charles XIII was still formally the monarch, but due to his poor health and age, effective power rested with Crown Prince Charles Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, the former French marshal who had been elected heir to the throne in 1810. Economic difficulties. Like much of Europe, Sweden was hit by the agricultural crisis caused by the year without a summer, failed harvests, food shortages, and rising prices. Norway. Christiania becomes capital. In 1816, Christiania, now Oslo, was officially declared the capital of Norway, replacing Copenhagen, since Norway was no longer under Denmark. This was a major symbolic step in Norwegian identity. Founding of Norges Bank, June 1816. The Bank of Norway was established to create a stable national currency, the spesidaler, and strengthen economic independence after the upheavals of war and union. Turkey. Reign of Mahmud II. The Sultan was working to strengthen central authority after years of internal disorder. He faced powerful provincial governors, the Janissaries, the elite military corps, and separatist unrest in the Balkans. Suppression of internal revolts. Mahmud II continued efforts to suppress regional rebellions and maintain Ottoman control in Europe, Anatolia, and the Arab provinces. Barbary states and the Battle of Algiers, 1816. The Ottoman-aligned Regency of Algiers was attacked by a British-Dutch fleet in August 1816, forcing an end to large-scale piracy and the release of thousands of Christian slaves. This reduced Ottoman prestige in North Africa. Russia. After Napoleon's defeat in 1815, Russia emerged as one of the strongest European powers. In 1816, Russia was consolidating its influence in Europe through the Holy Alliance, formed in 1815 by Russia, Austria, and Prussia, which sought to preserve monarchies and suppress revolutions. The year 1816 marked the formation of the first secret society of reform-minded officers in Russia, the Union of Salvation. This group was founded by young officers who had fought in Europe during the Napoleonic Wars and were influenced by liberal and constitutional ideas. In 1816, the government began experimenting with emancipation of serfs with land, starting in the Baltic provinces, Estonia, and Kurland. These early steps were limited and favored landlords, but marked a precedent for later reforms. Russia, like much of Europe, experienced unusually cold weather, crop failures, and famine risks. Food shortages and higher grain prices hit peasants especially hard, compounding social unrest. Canada. 1816 became known as the year without a summer due to widespread crop failures caused by frost, snow, and unusually cold weather, even in June and July. Food shortages hit settlers and Indigenous communities hard, particularly in Lower Canada, Quebec, and parts of the Maritimes. The Seven Oaks Incident, June 19, 1816. The most important event of 1816 in Canadian history was the Battle of Seven Oaks, also called the Seven Oaks Massacre, in present-day Winnipeg, Manitoba. Conflict broke out between the Hudson's Bay Company, HBC, settlers of the Red River Colony, founded by Lord Selkirk, and the Northwest Company, NWC, which had rival fur trade interests and strong alliances with the Métis people. A group of Métis, led by Cuthbert Grant, clashed with HBC Governor Robert Semple and his men. Semple and about 21 settlers were killed. Only one Métis fighter died. This event became a symbol of Métis resistance and an important milestone in Métis identity and Canadian fur trade history. Immigration and settlement. The British Crown encouraged settlement in Upper Canada, Ontario, and the Maritimes after the war. Many settlers arrived from the British Isles, while Loyalist descendants continued to spread into new territories. Mexico. The Guerra de Guerrillas, War of Guerrillas. Without strong central leadership, the independence struggle shifted into guerrilla warfare in 1816. Small bands of insurgents, scattered across rural and mountainous regions, harassed Spanish royalist forces. Leaders like Vicente Guerrero, Guadalupe Victoria, and Ignacio López Rayón continued fighting in different parts of New Spain. These guerrilla fighters kept the independence cause alive during what is often called the resistance phase of the war. Spanish royalist dominance. The Viceroyalty of New Spain, under Viceroy Juan Ruiz de Apodaca, appointed 1816, consolidated royalist control over major cities and trade routes. Spain's military regained the upper hand, forcing many rebels into isolated regions. Harsh crackdowns and executions of suspected insurgents created an atmosphere of fear. Economic hardship. Years of war devastated agriculture, trade, and mining, the backbone of the colonial economy. By 1816, famine and economic instability spread across many regions. The Spanish crown imposed new taxes to fund military campaigns, deepening resentment among the population. Brazil. In March 1816, a group of French artists, architects, and teachers known as the Museu Artística Francesa, French Artistic Mission, arrived in Rio de Janeiro. Led by Joaquim Le Breton, it included painters Jean-Baptiste Debret and Nicolas Antoine Taunet, sculptor Auguste Taunet, and architect Grandjean de Montigny. They were invited by the Portuguese court to establish a royal art academy and modernize Brazilian culture along European, especially neoclassical, lines. This mission had a lasting impact on Brazilian art, architecture, and education, leading to the creation of the Imperial Academy of Fine Arts in Rio. Economic developments. Coffee cultivation began expanding in Brazil during this period, though sugar and gold still dominated exports. The influx of Portuguese officials and nobles increased demand for goods and services in Rio, accelerating Brazil's integration into global trade. Iran. In 1816, Iran, then known as Persia, was ruled by Fath Ali Shah Qajar, 1797 to 1834, the second monarch of the Qajar dynasty. By 1816, Persia had lost large territories in the Caucasus, modern-day Georgia, Dagestan, and parts of Azerbaijan, to the Russian Empire. The humiliation of this treaty created resentment at court and among military leaders, sowing the seeds for the Second Russo-Persian War, 1826 to 1828. Crown Prince Abbas Mirza, governor of Azerbaijan and military commander, was actively working on modernizing the Persian army in the years around 1816. He sought European military advisors, mainly British and later French, to train troops in modern tactics and use of firearms, in preparation for future conflicts with Russia. This period marked the early stages of military and administrative reform in Persia, though resistance from conservative clerics and nobility limited Abbas Mirza's success. By 1816, Persia was becoming a crucial buffer in the rivalry between Britain in India and Russia in the Caucasus and Central Asia, a prelude to the Great Game of the 19th century. British envoys in Tehran encouraged Abbas Mirza's reforms and tried to secure Persia as an ally against Russian expansion. In 1816, famine and hardship in some provinces worsened discontent, though no major uprising occurred that year. India. British expansion in central and western India. In 1816, the East India Company was preparing for confrontation with the Maratha Confederacy, which still controlled large parts of western and central India. Political tensions escalated between the company and the Marathas, as the British sought to impose tighter control through subsidiary alliances. This year marked the final phase of negotiations and tensions before the outbreak of the Third Anglo-Maratha War, 1817 to 1819, which would end Maratha independence. The Anglo-Nepalese War, 1814 to 1816, concluded with the Treaty of Sugauli, March 1816. Nepal lost significant territory, Kamawa, Garhwal, and Sikkim areas, to the British East India Company. The treaty also allowed the British to recruit Gurkhas into their army, a practice that began in 1816 and continues to this day. Rise of Pandari raids. 1816 saw increasing raids by the Pindaris, irregular bands of horsemen loosely associated with the Marathas. They carried out plunder in central India, Bengal, and even into southern territories, causing great unrest. The British used these raids as a pretext for future large-scale military campaigns, leading directly to the Pindari War, 1817 to 1818. Cultural and intellectual developments. Christian missionary activity was growing in India in 1816, supported indirectly by the company after the Charter Act of 1813 allowed missionaries more freedom. Serampore College, founded by William Carey, Joshua Marshman, and William Ward, the Serampore Trio, was officially established in 1816 near Calcutta. It became a key institution for education, translation of texts, and missionary work. Indian reform-minded elites in Bengal, such as Raja Ram Mohan Roy, were beginning to gain prominence in intellectual and social debates, though his most active reform work would come slightly later, 1820. China. The Amherst Embassy, British mission to China. In 1816, the Amherst Embassy, a British diplomatic mission led by Lord William Amherst, arrived in Beijing to negotiate better trade relations for Britain. Amherst refused to perform the kowtow ritual prostration before the emperor. The Jiaqing emperor, insulted by this refusal, dismissed the mission without granting it an audience. By 1816, Jiaqing continued efforts to curb corruption among officials and restrain the power of the imperial banner armies, though with limited long-term success. Economic and social conditions. Agriculture remained the backbone of China's economy, and the population was still expanding rapidly. China's population in the early 19th century was around 300 to 400 million. However, land shortages, rural poverty, and population pressure were creating discontent in some regions. Japan. Despite isolation, Japan was not intellectually stagnant. By 1816, Rangaku, Dutch learning, the study of Western science and medicine through Dutch texts, was quietly growing among scholars. Confucianism remained dominant in official ideology, but there was increasing interest in practical studies, astronomy, medicine, and agriculture. Korea. In September 1816, two British naval vessels, the HMS Alceste, commanded by Captain Murray Maxwell, and the HMS Lyra, under Captain Basil Hall, sailed along the west coast of Korea. The British ships anchored near the Korean coast, observed the land, and interacted cautiously with locals, but the Joseon government refused official contact. This was one of the earliest Western encounters with Korea, foreshadowing later conflicts, such as the French expedition of 1866 and the U.S. expedition of 1871. Africa. In 1816, Africa was a continent of enormous diversity, home to powerful kingdoms, Islamic states, and local communities, while also facing deepening European colonial and slave trade pressures. The year is remembered especially for developments linked to the transatlantic slave trade, early European exploration, and regional political shifts. Here are the key African historical events in 1816. Foundation of Freetown as a base against the slave trade, Sierra Leone. In 1816, Britain strengthened its settlement in Freetown, Sierra Leone, which had been established earlier as a colony for freed slaves. That year, the British created the Royal African Corps, a regiment of freed slaves and black soldiers, to help suppress the slave trade. Establishment of Bathurst, modern Banjul, the Gambia. The British founded Bathurst, today Banjul, the capital of the Gambia, in 1816. It was established as a military and trading post at the mouth of the Gambia River to suppress the transatlantic slave trade and secure British influence in West Africa. Bathurst became a key outpost in Britain's anti-slavery campaign. Ongoing transatlantic slave trade. Although Britain had abolished the slave trade in 1807, illegal slave trading continued in 1816, especially from West and Central Africa. West African Islamic states and jihads. The Sokoto Caliphate, founded by Usman Dan Fodio in 1804 in present-day Nigeria, was expanding by 1816, spreading Islamic law and governance across West Africa. The Caliphate became one of the largest and most powerful African states of the 19th century. In Senegambia, Muslim reformers were also rising in influence, setting the stage for later jihads. Southern Africa, Zulu and Fikane begins. Around 1816, Shaka Zulu became the leader of the Zulu chiefdom in southeastern Africa, modern-day KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Shaka reorganized the Zulu military with new tactics and discipline, transforming them into a dominant regional power. North Africa, Ottoman provinces and Barbary states. In 1816, the Barbary corsairs, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, continued capturing ships and enslaving sailors in the Mediterranean. In August 1816, the bombardment of Algiers took place. A British-Dutch fleet attacked Algiers to force an end to the practice of enslaving Europeans. This marked the beginning of declining power for the Barbary states under Ottoman suzerainty. Exploration of Africa. European explorers were beginning to push further inland. In 1816, William John Burchell, an English naturalist, was exploring southern Africa, documenting plants, animals, and geography. His travels contributed to European scientific knowledge of Africa, though exploration was still limited mainly to the coasts. We hope you have enjoyed watching the video. Thank you.